Thank you, Linda. And may I first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet here tonight and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Tonight I'd like to share with you very early findings of a recent study investigating aspects of the learning background and educational history of professional musicians based here in Sydney. This study sought to establish what we know about the educational and learning backgrounds of those who earn their living through music. I asked 50 musicians and received 32 responses to 50 questions in the theme of when I decided to pursue a career as a professional musician, So tonight I ask, what are the factors that determine the development of a high level of performance as a professional musician, and which factors are responsible for success in music? What is, in fact, the currency to become a professional musician? For the purposes of this talk, the professional musician is defined as someone who earns their living derived from music activities. I'd like to begin with some background to the research literature surrounding talent development before sharing the initial results of the survey. It's well established that those seeking to work in music are better equipped for earning their living through music if they prepare for a portfolio career based upon flexibility and entrepreneurship. Building and sustaining a career in music requires the negotiation of multiple musical fields, with musicians working across traditional career boundaries to construct professional lives that span mainly performance and teaching. Dawn Bennett and Rachel Richardson's recent publication titled "What We Know About the Careers of Performing Arts Graduates" paints a picture of the current placement of these graduates at the lowest end of the full-time employment scale, according to the Graduate Destinations Survey 2013. Only 15% of performing arts graduates report being in full-time employment, with a further 37% in part-time employment and 21% identifying as self-employed. These data, when compared to teaching, nursing, engineering and medical studies, reporting in at over 50% of full-time employment, is dramatic. This is somewhat difficult to follow logically, with much reported and anecdotal evidence pointing to music being revered and loved by many. It is a fact reported by public and government websites that European countries, for example, spend millions of euros on music by supporting orchestras and specialist schools, whilst donors and sponsorship money also contribute to the endurance of music activities in a country. The reported amount of money, however, spent in Australia on music-related activities is much less than that of Germany, for example. It's reported that Germany has a flourishing music industry with 133 public and professional symphony orchestras, 83 music theatres, as well as a variety of music educational institutions. It's reported that the government spends approximately 2.5 billion euros per year on music-related activities, which is approximately 30% of the total cultural expenditure. Private funding by donations, foundation means and sponsoring adds approximately another 800 million euro to this. And the source from that was the Deutsches Musikinformationszentrum 2011. It's also reported by the same source that about 7 million amateur musicians live in Germany. People who earn their living through music do so with an appreciation of the general population. So what determines future success as a musician? As reported earlier in the 2013 Graduate Destination Survey data, It is not an easily attained goal to earn a living exclusively from music. Perhaps this is one reason many young people are encouraged by those who have influence over their decision-making, for example, their family, to train in a profession that has a more guaranteed means of earning a living. Now, to begin seeking information about the factors that are critical in an individual's decision to pursue a career as a professional musician, I'll take you through some of the relevant literature on gifted education, where it's noted by Professor Albert Ziegler from Erlangen-Nuremberg University that success as a professional musician depends on crucial factors. He and his colleagues hypothesised that a critical period that predetermines future success of musicians is the time when they made their decisions to pursue a career as a professional musician. One such factor important to an individual's natural ability, gift or aptitude as a musician, and another factor that research indicates equally relevant to the equation of success would be their development of musical talent through learning, training, environmental circumstances and practice. The environment, people and circumstance significantly influence the development of the gift, such as musicality, into a talent. My study undertaken here in Sydney is informed by Professor Ziegler and his team, who investigated the musical history of musicians based in Bavaria and sought to determine the factors or currency responsible for nurturing and developing musical talent to a level of professional musician. Both these factors, gifts and talent, figure predominantly in gifted education research, both in Australia and internationally. For example, here in New South Wales, the Department of Education has a gifted and talented policy for schools indicating that an identified gifted student requires differentiated learning approaches, resources and activities for their potential to be reached. From the policy, 3.2, you can read there, giftedness refers to potential distinctly beyond the average for the student's age and encompasses a broad range of abilities in the intellectual, creative, social, emotional and physical domains. Talent denotes achievement distinctly beyond the average for a student's age as a result of application to training and practice. So according to the policy, a student is both gifted and talented, as they cannot develop their talent without having the gift or the aptitude in a particular field or domain. This requires some further explanation, as being both gifted and talented is not an accepted understanding by all in the gifted education research arena. In referring to Gagnier's 2003 differentiated model of giftedness and talent, the DMGT, the New South Wales policy suggests a balanced, multivariate approach for the identification and education of gifted and talented students in New South Wales schools. The DMGT proposes that talent in a particular field emerges during a long developmental process that has its foundations in remarkable aptitudes, the gifts, and benefits from the constant influence of intrapersonal and environmental catalysts. The DMGT clearly shows how the association of a natural gift to a talent is systematically influenced by the catalysts that impact the progressive development of the gift into that measurable talent. Within this differentiated model just shown, the definition from the New South Wales Department of Education therefore indicates that gifts and talents are clearly independent. These are their definitions. Giftedness designates the possession and use of outstanding natural abilities, called aptitudes, in at least one ability domain, to a degree that places an individual at least among the top 10% of age peers. Their definition of talent designates the outstanding mastery of systematically developed abilities called competencies, knowledge and skills in at least one field of human activity to a degree that places an individual at least among the top 10% of age peers who are or have been active in that field. The DMGT, therefore, along with these definitions, is one such explanation of how a person succeeds to be exceptional or outstanding and operating above the normal population on standardised measures. I'm now going to hand out a model for you because it's a little bit difficult to see on the slide, which is another possible model of giftedness. I think that's probably enough. Oh, sorry, you didn't get it. Now the people that sat in the back row. The actiotope model of giftedness, or AMG, by Ziegler, 2005, is another such explanation of giftedness. It represents a shift in gifted education literature because it proposes a way that development of exceptionality can be understood differently. Instead of focusing on traits, gifts and aptitudes in a particular field of domain, like the DMGT and the policy definition from the New South Wales Department of Education, this model takes an actiotope or specific actions, happenings, as the key determinant for success, with interactions amongst the four components of determinants, goals, subjective action space, and action repertoire. See here that this model actually describes these interactions as a system and emphasises that the dynamic interaction of individuals with the environment. So the key part of the persons, the actions, and the environment is what Ziegler in the AMG is actually proposing as his model of giftedness. The focus of interest, therefore, under the AMG is actions, not traits, and the establishment of an effective repertoire of actions will mainly depend upon what learning opportunities the individual discovers in their environment and how effectively they can use them. Ziegler reports that an individual will practice, learn, and train years for this until they can achieve excellence in one of their particular field, and probably only one. So exceptional achievement, according to the AMG, is the outcome of a system involving the individual and their environment in the context of a particular domain. Hence, exceptionality is the product of a system rather than an individual. The individual's engagement with their particular field must always be with the aim to improve and to move their individual achievement in an upward direction. This principle, to give sufficient training opportunity and practice tasks, has been applied successfully in learning musical instruments, in mathematics, and in sport for centuries. Ziegler therefore argues that skill acquisition is the development of an effective repertoire of actions, which can be completed only through interaction with specific learning environments. These must be designed in line with the increasing skill levels of learners as they become increasingly professional. So both the DMGT and the AMG have been tested for veracity and their usefulness to guide the counselling process of those identified as having the potential for exceptional achievement. On the basis of a systemic approach, one could also assume that each step represented in these two models requires energy and resources. These resources are partly localised in the learner, that is, internal resources, and partly outside of the learner, that is, external resources. Thus, in turn, Ziegler's model is not really different to the DMGT, but more it's focused specifically in the systematically developed process of the talent and the catalysts that impact it. Environment, persons are two of those catalysts. The actions, therefore, of a person have the potential to change the environment, and so the actions need to be considered as the key determinants of the talent or gift, and may, and possibly do, change with the progression of time. According to the AMG, gifted behaviour is apparent when a person has a wish to do something, the ability to do it, and has the awareness that it can be done. To attain the action repertoire needed for progressing to the outstanding mastery in at least one field of human activity, to the degree that places an individual at least among the top 10% of HPs, the AMG therefore proposes that the environment and the systemic training in that environment are key factors. So how do these two models influence the development of a gifted and talented child to become a professional who earns their living from the specific discipline, domain, or particular field of giftedness and talent? According to Ziegler and his team, talent in music is regarded as an active process of self-organisation during which individuals gradually adapt to specific environments, and the environments are gradually adapted to the growing skill levels of the individual. The concept of available resources in individual material, social and informational environment with which that individual interacts is key. So now that I've explored the intellectual background and academic context in which my study is sitting, I'll move forward and detail the aim, the purpose, and the intent. The AMG was the theoretical model used by Ziegler and his team to adjust the Questionnaire of Educational and Learning Capital, or the QELC, from Vladut et al. In 2013, and then to adapt it specifically to the field of music. Therefore, the survey, the musical QELC, became known as the actiotope survey, as it asked questions specifically about the actions of the musical individuals. The QELC in music is a 50-question survey of educational and learning capital to investigate the developmental process of musical talent in an attempt to measure the catalysts that impact success in developing the musical aptitude into a musical talent. The study detailed here used an adaptation of the QELC that was used in the study of professional musicians in Bavaria, in Germany, in 2013. The investigation, therefore, of the study is the QELC, which was validated in a cross-cultural study of academic achievement undertaken in Turkey, China and Germany, and also in the US, where it was administered to sports stars who possess substantial amounts of educational and learning capital. So both the academic and the sports stars were tested using the QELC because they were currently determined to be professionals and earning their living inside that particular profession. If you turn over your handout, I've actually copied this table as well because it's quite difficult to see on the screen. So these are definitions and examples that came from the study in Germany that give a little bit of clarity to what the educational and learning capital actually refers to. So educational capital refers to the external resources which can be used to build up an effective repertoire of actions and are influenced not only by the person itself, but also by the environment. You can see down the left-hand side there that there are 5 forms of external resources identified as cultural, economic, social, infrastructural, and didactic. As you look through the definitions, you can see that economic educational capital includes all those possessions and valuables which can be used for the initiation or continuation of learning episodes. Cultural educational capital includes values, concepts and ways of thinking which can promote or impede the development of an effective action repertoire. Social educational capital includes all individuals and social institutions that have direct or indirect impact on the success of learning episodes. Infrastructural EC includes the material and policy options which can be used in support of learning, whilst didactic EC is the available knowledge on the design and optimisation of pedagogical approaches. The final column in the table gives you some examples specific to music. So, for example, in economic educational capital, EEC, a fundamental precondition for being able to learn to play the violin is the availability not only of the violin, but that the student can also afford the violin instruction. You can see the other examples there as well. I provided you with this table because this was the basis of the questions of the survey, which I'll also show you. To look through the learning capital, you'll see that it's the internal or endogenous resources that help students to build up a repertoire of effective activity. Again, there are 5 forms of learning capital: organismic, which includes health, endurance, etc. Telic or motivational resources, including the learning goals, orientation, self-confidence, and personal learning resources, including learning strategies, self-regulation, skills, etc. And these are labelled organismic, telic, actional, episodic, and attentional. Within the learning capital, the definition of the first one refers to the physiological and constitutive resources of a learner. The telic refers to the availability of learning goals. The actional LC includes the complete action repertoire of a learner, of which the learner is basically capable of utilising. Episodic LC represents the available goal or situation-related patterns of actions. And finally, the attentional LC refers to the quantitative and qualitative attention resources available for learning. And final column again has some examples. So, for example, the actional LC, if the student has more effective learning strategies at his or her disposal, he will more easily overcome motivational obstacles. So as these 2 tables formed the basis of the survey questions, it is presumed through the questionnaire that the more external and internal resources in an actiotope allow for more successful adaptations in the musical domain, and hence the development of a more effective action repertoire or repertoires. The Nuremberg Music-Ecological Approach, which is based on the AMG, presents an enhanced view in identifying gifted and talented musicians, as it postulates that talent development in music does take place in this actional sphere. And it includes an individual, the material, the social, and the informational environment with which the individual interacts. So therefore, talent is, in the NMEA, regarded as an active process of self-organisation, during which individuals gradually adapt to specific environments, and the environments are gradually adapted to the growing skill levels of the individuals. In addition to musical talent, the concept of available resources in an individual's actiotope or environment is put with the other factors for identification purposes. Therefore, we could consider at this point that musical giftedness is actually a characteristic which changes over time within an environmental context and is the result of various interactions between individuals and the environment. So the study aimed to measure the EC, educational capital, and LC, learning capital, of the professional musicians who self-identified as being people that earn their money or earn their living, through musical activities. They were all based in Sydney. In fact, they were all based and employed here at the Sydney Conservatoire of Music. Therefore, I was able to identify them as professionals earning their living through music, and they also self-identified by completing the survey. The aims were to identify the most dominant areas of EC and LC, and also to try and identify which factors determine the development of a high level of performance as a professional musician and which factors are responsible for success in music. The crucial question to answer, I think, through this study is what determines successful adaptations to the environment. So the approach and methodology, ethics was granted in March 2016 to undertake the study. The Questionnaire of Educational and Learning Capital was translated by the original designer from German into English, so it was a little bit tricky for some people. The tenses weren't quite in the right place. And I tried to modify it but keep it in its original form for validity, just for Australian participants. As I said, I made a call for participants through email recruitment, according to my ethics, and that was made to 50 musicians who are employed here at the Sydney Con via email, and that happened on the 17th of April. Very lucky, I think, that 32 people replied to my survey in the last 2.5 weeks, and they completed the survey online through SurveyMonkey about their educational capital and learning capital. It was specifically designed for them to respond to the survey when they were thinking about the time they decided to pursue a career as a professional musician. So I didn't collect any data as to what age or stage of their musical development they were at when they decided to pursue a career as a professional musician. On reflection, that may have been interesting data to collect. But that's good for me to always be learning those things. The questionnaire took no more than 15 minutes. In fact, SurveyMonkey tells you exactly how long it took. One person did it in 6 minutes 34, and the longest was about 12 minutes. So it wasn't an onerous or difficult survey to complete. The results of each of the 50 items on the QELC were collated, and a review of the initial data has been collected for this talk, mainly in frequencies. The next step, however, of the analysis is to test for mean differences between each of the 50 items. I'm going to use a series of Mann-Whitney U tests using a one-tail testing at a 0.5 level of significance, and hopefully I'll undertake that in June and July. The reason I'm giving you the timeline is that I will travel to Germany in early July and work with Professor Ziegler in determining if there's any comparative data between the QELC administered here in Sydney and that administered in Germany. In the QELC, 5 items assess each of the 5 forms of educational and learning capital. However, as I said, all the questions are asked the respondents to refer to the point when they made their decision to pursue a career in music. They're asked to express their degree of agreement on a 6-point Likert scale, ranging from 1, you strongly agree, partially agree, to 6, I strongly disagree, and obviously 4 is disagree and 5 is partially disagree. I thought I would show you the survey questions, just so that you could have a little bit of a look, but just looking at the time to make sure that I still had time left to do that. So the survey looked like this. Please read the questions, select the most appropriate response. Answer the questions in relation to your journey in becoming a professional musician. So the questions ask, I'll take you down to this one because it's shorter. When I decided to pursue a career as a professional musician, prompted to think about your socio-cultural view, and you can see there are 5 subsets. Is that okay to read from the back? No. Okay. So the first one says, almost everyone I know thinks that learning and practicing music is very important. I know a lot of people who think learning and practicing music is important. I know a lot of people who think I should keep on improving my music skills. I know a lot of people for whom being among the best in music is very important. I know a lot of people who consider it important that my conditions for learning and practicing music are good. As I said, the translation was a little sketchy in places. So if you look back at your table that I handed out, you'll see that each one of these questions are under one of the actual areas of capital, so economic, cultural, social, educational, infrastructure, didactic. And then each one of the subsets is trying to determine where the person interacted mainly, or what actions they took inside their environment. So that was how the survey looked. The crucial question to answer through the study is what determines successful adaptations of the environment, which is why the survey asked questions about their environmental interactions. So the results that I've got, the early results that I've got in the 5 days since the survey's been closed, is really showing some significance in all of the areas apart from the economic. It was obvious in survey responses that economic educational capital was not a significant factor of influence in pursuing a career in music. And this just gives you the results in a frequency table, easy to see. There was a possible 160 responses, which is 32 times 5 subsections in each category of the educational capital and the learning capital. Some questions were left blank, which is why I haven't hit the total of 160 in all of them. But you can see there that the most dominant were the infrastructural, and which is the material and policy options, which can be used in support of learning, and the didactic, which was the available knowledge on the design and optimisation of pedagogical approaches. So the strongest responses, 29 out of the 32 agreed to the question. I know a lot of people who think learning and practicing music is very important. 27 agreed on the cultural. I always know where I can find advice for learning and practicing music when I need it. 30 agreed out of 31 infrastructural. I take full advantage of my good learning and practicing environment at home, at work, with family and friends. And 30 again agreed in the didactic. My music learning helps me to improve my music skills. In the area of learning capital, significance was shown amongst those surveyed in all of the areas: the physiological, fitness, the telic, learning goals, the actional, the episodic, which is situational patterns of actions, and the attentional. Again, just a small graphic representation to show you where the agreement and disagreement was. The actional and the telic were the most significant in agreement, but the others were not terribly far behind. In the physiological, again, which is, as I explained, the fitness mainly, the being physically fit helps me in learning and practicing my instrument. 30 out of 32 responded. Oh, I've been saying 31. I have to wipe that one out. The TELIC, my prior knowledge, helps me with my learning and practicing of music, 31 out of the 32. That's the capital that refers specifically to the availability of learning goals. The actional, again 31 out of 32, I know that I'll improve when I practice according to my goals. And episodic, 29, I have a lot of experience on how I can do very well with my music. And the final one, 28 out of 32, I'm focused on improving my music skills in the attentional, which refers to the quantitative and qualitative attention resources available for learning. So, in conclusion, the question of how gifted individuals manage to progress down a very long path of learning to a state of excellence formed the starting point of this study. A learning process, which may involve many years, requires that learners find the motivation to continually extend the limits of their capabilities and pave the way forward to professional musician status. A straightforward hypothesis, therefore, could be that professional musicians with more resources become successful and can earn their living from musical activities. This pilot study has the potential to impact on the local field of music talent development in schools and at tertiary levels. In fact, there is potential for impact on gifted education research with the provision of improved identification and education of those identified early as gifted or talented musicians. I think perhaps the pilot study with further analysis has the potential to provide new and innovative data on the successful adaptation of the New South Wales Department of Education gifted and talented policy with regard to musically gifted and talented students by unpacking both the educational and learning capital of professional musicians based in Sydney. So is this what we're doing, training these musicians to do? Certainly would like to find out what her educational and learning capital is. So I've given you, I hope, an Australian snapshot. Music is held in very high regard in virtually all known human societies, and it's unimaginable that professional musicians would cease to exist. This time of change and going forward, I think that this pilot study is dedicated to investigating the development of musical expertise and in identifying the currency for success as a professional musician. The investigation into factors that influence the development of professional musician status have provided a snapshot of relevant influences on the education and training of future musicians in a local way. And the study could be extended nationally, but much is still yet to be done in terms of analysis of the results before this can be considered. In addition, the results from this study may provide data from a completely different education system and geographical location to that of previous QUELC studies, and so it will contribute to the understanding of both gifted education, talent development, and specifically music education. The project aims and concepts using educational learning capital of professional musicians has not been undertaken before in Australia. The results from the study done in Germany revealed that a critical period that predetermines future successes of musicians is the time when they made their decisions to pursue the career. And I think that's probably something that we need to consider. When do our students here in tertiary study or our students in secondary study actually decide to continue to pursue their career as professional musicians? And what learning capital and educational capital and resources do they actually have at their disposal? Among other things, according to Ziegler and Baker in 2013, the availability of both the external and the internal learning resources would be crucial for any decisions these students make. Thank you. So what is today's musical currency? Hopefully not this, and there's more results to come.
Before I take questions, for those of you who haven't been along before, there are some complimentary refreshments available after we finish in here, where we can continue the discussion, and I hope that as many of you as possible will take advantage of that. So do we have some questions for Jennifer, please? Michael?
Just a quick clarification. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for the presentation. You may have said this, but I possibly missed it. Your participants were only performers, were they?
Correct. Yes. They're only for the performance staff here.
Staff members, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Just exactly to that point, what bias do you think is included in that you've chosen staff members of this institution?
I think I have to acknowledge that there is a potential for bias, but because the study was very specifically looking at people who earn their living as a professional musician, I started with this group that I had already met that criteria or met that definition. But yeah, I acknowledge that there's potential for bias, certainly. I'd really like to continue the study outside of our institution. I do acknowledge that we have an amazing level of professional musicians and number here. I'm sure that I didn't get them to identify internationally, regional or locally, but I'm sure that many of them would be able to identify internationally. It would be presumptuous of me to think that only the musicians here earning their living through music were the only classification of musician earning their living through music. So yes, to be able to take the study away from its pilot into a larger study and to be able to get a broader range of people earning their living through music would certainly add quite a different dimension. Yeah, I agree with that.
We often make our decisions in stages, there are processes. So how somebody interprets your questioning of at the point of making a decision would then have an impact on the kind of answers that they would give. So the implications of that then on the results of this study.
I think that's why, I think that's why I wanted to also present the Gagne differentiated model of gifted and talented, because a very large part of that model is chance. So when I decided to pursue my career as a professional musician, we have to acknowledge that that is also a factor as well. Yeah.
Couple more.
I don't know much about this type of analysis that you're going to do on it. But how much of it, what can you actually get from something which is so uniform about it? Is there any?
Well, by drilling into the data and trying to undertake what level of significance, be able to see within those 5 areas inside educational capital and learning capital, which ones are actually either somewhere connected or whether or not they're actually stronger. So it's looking for strength, I suppose, in those. So if I am able to determine that the area of actional learning capital is the strongest, then perhaps from that we can infer, approaches to curriculum, approaches to identification, approaches to, assisting in that area. I'm hoping that, when I do that further analysis, I will get some level of significance that does indicate. Yeah.
In terms of the people you survey, following up on the previous questions, were they from a classical background or jazz or contemporary music or what? Did that come into it at all?
No, it was across the board. Yeah, I just started at A and went down to Z of the of the performance staff. Yeah.
Can I just expand ideally, is that to just expand the amount of people we interview, or you also expand the nature of the so look also into where they went to school, how old they were when they said, I'm going to be a musician. Personal callous, like, I was listening to commercial on TV and thought, I'm going to write jingles for commercials or whatever, things that aren't, that are fairly specific and individual, or is it just people?
Certainly a demographic style survey would give me a lot of information. In fact, a couple of people that responded to the survey sent me an email saying, I'd like to tell you my story about how I trained and when I decided to be. So they were, even though that wasn't part of what I was doing with the survey, they were actually offering to give me more information than was there. So yes, I think my initial aim was to see whether or not this had any legs, whether or not it was actually something that was going to give me a result, and there was any reason as a pilot to continue further on with the study. So yes, certainly potential for some data about times and dates and ages, but also maybe some interviews with people to get that information.
I've got a question.
Yes, Linda.
Given that your sample is people who were successful in their decision to be a professional musician, do you have any plans for extending it to people who were unsuccessful? Because, for example, things like the economic capital, maybe the people who were successful had enough money and didn't really even think about that, whereas some of the people who weren't successful failed because they didn't have access to that.
Yes and yes. I think that that would be an interesting design of a question, how you would identify as successful or not successful. So maybe you might talk about earning your living through music exclusively, and as we go back to that data, there's only a reported 15.3% of the population, or the graduates, that identify as having full-time work in performing arts. So yeah.
So you can maybe extend it to graduates?
Yes. Yeah. As a way of actually trying to enter into that sort of investigation at a less, I'm going to say not a less sensitive time, but maybe for somebody who's older and has been trying for a long time to be successful as a musician, yeah.